Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about the 3 keys to personal power. We could also call them the 3 choices that we always have to create positive, constructive change in our life. And in almost every circumstance of our life, we have these 3 choices. We can accept things the way that they are, we can ask for positive change, or we can remove ourselves. And the great news about having options is that it allows us to take our own personal power rather than feeling victimized or powerless. And I think the whole course of our evolution of consciousness is about recognizing incrementally how much power we do have and growing in the realization that we are all little aspects of God, co-creating our own realities with the tens of thousands of choices we make every day in our life that determine the course and experience that we have here. And it's very easy to be unconscious and feel victimized or hopeless or powerless over our life experience. But when we can embrace these 3 options of acceptance, of requesting or taking action for change, or removing ourselves, we grow in our capacity and maturity to manage our own personal power. And again, these co-creative opportunity that we have here. And I say co-creative because we are part of a larger system. Lots of times we want control, which is somewhat of an illusion because we are, again, part of a system. So we have input into what happens. But there's a larger wisdom happening here that when we can align ourselves with it, then we can get into a flow of life that's often much more interesting and fulfilling in its unfoldment than we might imagine for ourselves at any given time point, because we can't see the future, but it is unfolding. And I'm reminded of the serenity prayer, probably the first, maybe the second prayer I learned. I'm sure I knew the Lord's Prayer at that point. And the serenity prayer points to these aspects of personal empowerment and asks us to grow in wisdom. So the serenity prayer, if you're not familiar with it, goes, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And coming to acceptance is often radical personal change in itself. When we can really clarify what we are powerless over and come to the peace or serenity to accept our powerlessness, to accept what we cannot change, that in itself is often a radical shift within us because we can spend a lot of time in emotional energy being fearful, anxious, angry about things that we cannot change. I did a podcast on hopeless hope, number 156, and hopeless hope is the shadow side of hope, and I'm a very hopeful person, but hopeless hope is where we are placing our desires, our aspirations, our own well-being, and our hope in people and circumstances that probably are not going to change. That's been the essence of my codependency, is trying to quote-unquote help people change, often with the motive that they'll show up better for me in my life. If you would be different, I'll feel better. So I'm going to help you change. And lots of times in a codependent relationship, the other person wants you to help them change because they aren't willing or able to do that work themselves. They're not owning their own personal power. So one of the hallmarks of codependency is everybody's projecting their power onto the other person. Again, if you would be different, or if you would help me with this thing that I'm not good at, or I'll do the thing that I'm good at to help you be different so that I'll feel more comfortable, nobody's on their own side of the street. And when we start with this option of acceptance, it really calls us to look within ourselves. And although acceptance may seem like giving up, it actually grounds us in a greater reality and truth that can shift perspective, where we're putting our energy, and the whole dynamics of circumstances and relationships. When I stop trying to change things that I can't change frees up a lot of energy to do other things. Coming to acceptance is often a radical change within ourselves and even in our behavior. I've been working with a woman who's been in a pretty abusive relationship for a long time. It's a circumstance I was in years ago myself, with an addicted, disempowered man who I'm working very hard to support. She's working very hard to support this person. He has no one else in his life, and he's very verbally abusive to her. And on one level, she's victimized by this relationship, and on another level, she has voluntarily chosen to be here. She feels a responsibility to help him, and there are lots of empty promises of change that don't happen. He's very controlling and obsessed with her, and although she's still pretty unconscious about it because he's such a disaster, it's very easy to point the fingers at him, and she's actually ready now and in a place to take personal responsibility and realize that she has the capacity to leave. And she's gone through these 3 options of accepting that the relationship's not going to change, of making positive changes in her own life. She's in recovery from her own addictions, spending more time with friends and doing things she enjoys. That's the asking for change, even though he doesn't like it. And now finally she has decided to remove herself. And there's still, of course, a lot of blame on him. And he is quite a jerk. But the real work is going to be looking inside herself and asking why she chose this person and why she has stayed so long. Not in a blaming way, but in a self-discovering way, to look at our own negativity and where we're being called to grow and evolve. That's where our power lies. And the cycles of abuse that many people are caught in come from these unconscious places of our own inner negativity, unworthiness, guilt or shame. And when we turn and face those things within ourselves, that's where the real change starts to happen. Certainly we need to change the outside circumstances many times in our life, but just changing the outside is often not enough. We can do what's called switching seats on the Titanic by leaving one difficult circumstance and choosing the same difficult circumstance in another flavor, because we think the problem exists outside of us rather than recognizing that our picker is broken. And if your pick is broken, you better fix that motherfucker. And it can be fixed. And that's what good therapy and spiritual practice and self-inquiry is about. And one of the big tenets of acceptance is honesty, self-honesty, accepting what actually is, internally and externally, owning what's functional and dysfunctional in our life. And it's important to own both, and we all have both. We all have things we're good at and things we suck at, and we can lean into and strengthen the things we're good at. And the real challenge for most of us is to be able to open up and look at the things that are underdeveloped in us, to release old negative attachments and resolve unresolved emotional issues so that we can be more present in this co-creative process and not just repeating old patterns unconsciously, rolling along with the wheel of samsara. So Mary Ellen may leave Danny, but if she doesn't change within herself, she's just going to find Fred, who's going to do the same thing again. But if she changes within herself, then she can choose differently going forward. I know for me, accepting people or circumstances, even in the larger world, can bring tremendous peace. And acceptance for me often involves grief, letting go of my hopes, of my dreams, of my delusions around, again, a relationship or a circumstance, being willing to let go of my own ideas and be with what actually is. And there's often a letting go process involved in that, but on the other side of what might be grief, there is a greater peace and grounding. And again, this freed up energy to make different choices. There's this wonderful little phrase in Al-Anon where they say, mind your own business and get some business to mind. I know in my very dysfunctional first marriage, to an active addict once we got divorced and I filed bankruptcy and really started to do this self-inquiry within myself about why did I pick this person? What was my part in this craziness of a marriage? And instead of jumping into another relationship, which was a pattern that I had, I took some time for myself, had a period of actually intentional celibacy, and I realized that being in that really dramatic, dysfunctional dynamic was a distraction from the things I was actually afraid of doing in my life, like going to graduate school, writing a book, starting a career as a therapist. I was way too busy putting out fires, and there was a lot of them. He was walking around with a gasoline can, flicking matches all over the place. And I'm behind him with a fire extinguisher. I was way too busy putting out fires to pay attention and to actually do the scary things in my own life. And I was pretty unconscious about that, but once I saw it, I realized, oh, this is like a hobby. And I accepted and removed myself, and then I had the energy to actually pursue my own goals and dreams in my life, which can be a daunting and terrifying thing, actually. But if we want something different, we have to do something different. And that often requires us to go outside our comfort zone, which is uncomfortable. And learning to tolerate discomfort is probably one of the most important things that I have learned in my adult life. So the second key or option that we have, which is to ask for change, that can be both internal or external. Making steps for positive change, like the Serenity Prayer points to, change the things I can. What can I do differently? How can I own my own power? Now, we may need to ask for change from others. And in order to do that, we need to look within and get clear about what it is that we want and need. More of that introspective work, and it can be quite illuminating to spend time asking, what is it that I really want or need here? I worked with this couple for a long time, and they had a really beautiful and functional exterior of their life. They had a nice house. They both worked. They had cars and took vacations, but there was an emptiness between them. They had almost no sex life and very little emotional connection. And there was a lot of bickering back and forth. And he thought everything was pretty okay as long as she was happy, but she was not happy, and so that made him unhappy. And she was the driver of their couple's work, and over time she was able to clarify what she really needed. And we boiled it down to some very simple things. She needed a sexual relationship, and she needed an emotional relationship. And he said, I would like to grow in those ways as well. And they did a lot of really great work together. Ultimately, she came to accept that he was not capable of providing for her in a way that she felt satisfied with, and they decided to split. And they're both in new relationships that are really satisfying for him. He's with a partner that is much more aligned with him sexually and emotionally, and she is as well. And so each of these keys or options to accept, to ask for or create positive change, or to remove ourselves, they all move us forward in the flow of life. And so where do you need the serenity to accept what you cannot change? Where do you need courage to change the things you can? And where do you need the wisdom to know the difference? Serenity, acceptance, change, and wisdom. Essential principles we can all use on a regular basis. Thank you so much for listening. I'm working on scheduling groups, teachings, and offerings for the upcoming year in my budding Open Door Growth community. Click the link in the show notes and join us on Patreon. You can join free if you just want to check it out, and there are different tier offerings depending on how much you want to receive. If you'd like to find out if a block of spiritual psychology work might benefit you in your life, shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com, and I can help you grow in acceptance, wisdom, and courage in your life. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.